Christmas bells carry across Bloomsbury, faint over the hiss of gaslights as fog rubs the bricks. A narrow stairwell exhales cold, and a door on Great Coram Street sits strangely still, reluctant. Somebody has turned the key from outside, an everyday act twisted into a quiet, dreadful trick. Inside that room, a young dancer will not answer, and the morning grows heavier by the minute. One object on a table, a piece of fruit, waits with a human bite, ordinary yet unsettling. A hand will be found pressed to a brow, not in comfort, but in control. A final, humiliating gesture. London loves a Christmas spectacle. What happens when the spectacle is blood and calculation? The city thrives on stories, but this one refuses a neat moral, even for a pious holiday. Investigators will look for simple robbery, then pause at the locked door and revise everything. That small metal turn, performed outside the room, whispers premeditation rather than chaos. This is not frenzy, this is choreography, the kind learned by watching people and waiting. A neutral observation is useful here. The details are mundane, which is why they convince. Near term, police and press will swarm, and rumors will harden into names faster than facts. Yet before suspects, motives, and sea voyages, we must ask, who was the woman behind the headline? If the scene is a riddle, her life provides the legend to the map, the missing scale and symbols. So we step back from the bed and the lock, and we follow her out into the lights of Leicester Square, toward a stage, a salary, and a debt that would not wait. Midday on Christmas, footsteps climb the boarding house stairs, hesitant at first, then determined. A knock brings no reply, a second knock finds the corridor listening, and someone fetches a tool. Timber yields with a splintering protest, and the room presents itself in grim, deliberate order. The bedclothes are matted, and the air is coppery, the smell unmistakable to anyone who has bled. On the mattress lies a throat ruined to the bone, a cut so deep it announces method, not panic. One palm has been pressed hard against the forehead, smearing, as if to command silence after death. Drawers are disturbed, but not like a thief in a hurry, more like a performance set to deceive. A chair sits a fraction off square, the kind of detail you notice and cannot forget afterward. A small apple shows a crescent bite, human and recent, an intimacy turned accidental evidence. What kind of killer pauses to eat, then arranges a room to look disorderly, yet leave a tidy lock? The door's mechanism matters. Turned from the outside, it recasts the timeline and the intent. If a stranger left last, he expected discovery and planned against interruption, which narrows the field. A concise aside is fair. Ordinary hardware often exposes extraordinary lies better than speeches. Near term, detectives will freeze the room, sketch the bed, bag the fruit, and question the landlady. They will chart the morning's movements, mark the time of silence, and test whether neighbors heard struggle. The lock forces a conclusion. Someone departed calmly enough to secure the door and pocket the key. That means the story did not begin at the threshold. It began earlier, with money, work, and need. To understand why a dancer ended here, we must leave the blood behind and find her in the footlights, where applause was currency, rent was due, and respectability had a price few could pay. By night she danced beneath chandeliers at the Alhambra, a palace of gas and applause. Wages came in irregular drips, with fines for lateness and costs hidden in every costume. A borrowed shilling here, a promised payment there, the arithmetic of survival kept revising itself. On Christmas week, she still owed rent, and dignity, like coal, was dear in cold weather. That morning she produced a half-sovereign, settled 9 shillings, and pocketed the precious change. Such coins travel quickly in London. They leave a hand, then vanish into bread and rooms. Harriet had a child about 8, a fact that deepens the silence around certain choices. Respectability required money. The stage provided attention, not always the kind that paid promptly. Between shows, introductions were common, and a gentleman might offer supper, cab fare, or company. What options remain when applause pays late and rent knocks early and loudly at noon? A practical note deserves emphasis. Economic detail often predicts danger better than romantic rumor. Debt limits safe companions, narrows routes home, and makes late-night calculations feel inexorable. Landladies expect punctual coins, not stories. Police later expect neat stories, not complicated lives. A dancer's social map overlaps crowds, bars, bus routes, and rooms with doors that stick. In that map, kindness mixes with risk, and risk learns to speak politely over music. Harriet could be charming, weary, hopeful, or guarded, none of which cancels the pressure of winter. She borrowed a small sum that day, evidence of a cupboard that echoed when opened. She also paid most of what she owed, a gesture toward calm before festivities. Near term, these mundane movements will later harden into timelines, motives, and misunderstood intimacies. Reporters will translate coins into character, as if 1 week's budget proves a soul. The truth is plainer. Survival requires bargaining, and bargaining wears respectability thin by Christmas. We can acknowledge complexity without excusing violence. Poverty is not prophecy, merely constant friction. Her pride appears in small acts, settling rent, dressing well, keeping routines that maintain a stage smile. But pride cannot padlock danger. The lock we saw earlier belongs to someone else's pocket. The city encourages strangers to feel familiar, and familiarity can become a script for harm. Near term, police will treat her acquaintances as suspects, and her necessities as if they were vices. That is why the world around her matters as much as the man beside her. To read her choices fairly, we need the rule book of her century, the code of respectability, and its penalties. So, before the itinerary of Christmas Eve, we open that rule book and find the chapter labeled Fallen. Victorian Britain preached separate spheres, public vigor for men, private virtue for women. Ideology trapped daily life, turning wages into morality tests and mistakes into permanent labels. A woman alone at night invited comment. A woman working on stage invited a file. Officials counted unfortunates in tidy ledgers, while reformers insisted the true number was staggering. 8,600 appears in reports. Estimates near 80,000 haunt the margins and streets. Numbers disagree, but the pressure they describe is consistent. Demand met by poverty and silence. Charity houses promised rescue. Admission often required confession that fit a donor's preferred storyline. Magistrates lectured, newspapers tutted. The public wagged a finger while buying tickets and brandy. Who received sympathy first in such a system? The clergyman, the surgeon, or the poor dancer? Language did the early work of judgment, assigning purity or stain before facts could walk. Respectability functioned as currency. Men could borrow against it, women had to pay cash. Policing followed suit, prioritizing reputations that looked solid over lives that looked complicated. A neutral observation belongs here. Culture often shapes evidence by deciding who seems credible. Near term, that bias will grant a gentleman the benefit of doubt and volume. It will deny Harriet full witness in her own story. Replacing memory with stereotypes, even the word mistress can turn companionship into scandal and poverty into a character flaw. Yet a city's morality is not evenly applied. Class smooths sharp edges for some. This double ledger matters when a murder needs solving, because credibility becomes a kind of proof. Witnesses are weighed differently. A uniform or a collar adds ounces to any statement. Thus the case enters court already tilted, as if the scales wore evening clothes. We are not rewriting history. We are naming frictions that investigators themselves quietly navigated, and those frictions will steer the hunt toward men who look respectable and away from others. They will also color the press, which sells comfort at Christmas faster than ambiguity. Near term, this moral frame narrows the search and amplifies whatever fits a festive sermon. To test the frame, we must now follow the woman herself through Christmas Eve, hour by hour. Only then can we compare sermon with sidewalk and decide where the truth changed clothes. So we return to Leicester Square, to a busy theater, and to a meeting with a German-speaking gentleman, toward the itinerary that will later anchor the entire investigation. Evening gathers at Leicester Square as footmen shout last calls and the Alhambra's orchestra packs away. Harriet leaves in a good dress, walking beside a well-kept man who speaks German with casual fluency. Crowds blur their edges, but witnesses remember the contrast, her lively step, his reserved, professional calm. They choose supper at Cavour, a bright room where cutlery talks and sauces warm the holiday air. Menus promise comfort. Conversation lowers. A waiter notices the gentleman's accent and the woman's careful laughter. Coins shift discreetly, a habit learned by anyone who has ever counted backward from rent. After dinner, they board an omnibus, folding into the city's rhythm while gas lamps skim the windows. A barmaid later recalls the pair's nearness, the way strangers sit as if rehearsing future alibis. The route is ordinary, precisely why investigators later trace it easily through memory and timetables. They step down, cross a wet street, and stop at a fruiterer whose stall shines like varnish. Apples and nuts are bought, tokens of comfort, small luxuries at the edge of winter. Who selects a sweet, takes a bite, and then walks toward a door that will betray them. Neutral note, timelines grow from simple acts. yet their accuracy depends on nerves, lighting, and attention. Such accounts drift, but together they sketch an itinerary sturdy enough to test against closing bells. Near midnight, Great Coram Street lies quiet, the boarding house breathing evenly behind its thin brick. They climb, the corridor holding its breath. A key turns later, but for now the latch only clicks. Neighbors hear movement, nothing more. No struggle, no raised voice, only the soft grammar of arrival. Somewhere, a clock writes 12. Shoes are placed, garments loosened, and a festive city finally exhales. Near term, every stop on this route will generate names, descriptions, and times to be cross checked. Receipts are sparse, but habits leave residue. The city itself becomes a witness when people cannot. Those purchases on the counter, that apple in a pocket, will soon reappear under lamplight as evidence. And the simple domestic rhythm at the end, the closing door, the expected privacy, will prove misleading. Bridge. We return to the room, to the fruit on the table and the tools of early science, where ordinary objects begin speaking louder than gossip. The room is still, but the objects argue. Investigators learn to listen without interrupting. On a small table, an apple bears a fresh arc, a crescent impression with distinct molar edges. They capture that bite in plaster, a delicate ritual meant to trap teeth into declaring allegiance. Comparison rules out the woman. Someone else bit the fruit. Recently, confidently, perhaps while waiting his moment. A handkerchief shows blood and watermarks, the blotchy signatures of hurried washing against a stubborn stain. A basin holds pink memory. Linen fibers cling along the rim like a conscience refusing dismissal. The bedclothes tell of pressure rather than chase. The posture suggests restraint, not struggle toward the door. Who presses a hand to a brow at the end, as if to quiet a name forever? Neutral observation. Early forensics loved precision, but their instruments often outran what courts could accept. No national fingerprint files, no reliable blood typing, no cameras quick enough to freeze everything that mattered. What remained were measurements, careful sketches, and the patient reading of mundane tools and motions. The lock, once praised for discretion, becomes the loudest witness. It was turned from the hallway, outward. That act requires calm, time, and a key. Details that prune wild theories and cultivate premeditation. If the killer ate, cleaned, arranged, and locked, he trusted the quiet and likely knew the house. Near term, detectives will convert these small certainties into a public description of a foreign gentleman. They will circulate the dental impression, the handkerchief, and the locked door puzzle through newspapers and precincts. Rewards and headlines amplify everything. The same echoes that spread carols will carry suspicion to the docks. The city is practical. It notices accents, luggage, and the direction of a man's shoes at dawn. A concise aside, evidence organized clearly can travel faster than a suspect without wasting breath. Thus the apple's bite, the washed cloth, and the decisive lock shape the search more than rumor. Near term, the hunt will leap from Bloomsbury to trains and piers, testing ships' rosters and ticket books. Bridge. Follow those ripples outward, toward witnesses who swear they saw a German, a steamer called Wangerland, and a lineup that startles even the police. By Boxing Day, newspapers print a description. A foreign gentleman, well turned out, speaking German without searching for words. Police circulars echo the phrasing, and telegraph clerks stitch London to its ports with tidy, humming wires. 200 pounds glitters above the column, a sum that could move a family or mend a theater roof. Who would not look twice at a neighbor, then swear they noticed an accent over supper last night? The waiter from Cavour volunteers a memory of careful manners, precise orders, and soft consonants across the table. A barmaid from the omnibus recalls the pair sitting close, knees nearly touching whenever the carriage lurched over cobbles. The fruit seller repeats a sale, apples and nuts, completed with relaxed confidence near the last hour before midnight. At the Alhambra, colleagues remember her leaving with a man whose clothes suggested education rather than alleyways. It bears mentioning that memory is not a ledger, it is a chorus, loudest where money sets the tempo. Detectives collate descriptions into a composite that favors neat hair, a trimmed beard, and a medical steadiness of voice. They check hotels where German travelers usually lodge, then visit chemists, surgeries, and clubs where foreign mail arrives. The landlady recounts the late return and the quiet that followed, a silence heavy enough to bruise the hallway. Timetables and closing bells anchor a timeline. Inconsistent bits are tucked away, but not thrown out entirely. Some witnesses disagree about height or age. Most agree about poise, the unhurried air of someone used to authority. As leads multiply, so do contradictions. Still, The accent and the dinner route keep pointing east and seawards. A practical note deserves space. A clear narrative travels faster through a city than a precise but tangled one. Reporters prefer a gentleman suspect. Readers do too, especially at Christmas when villains should wear evening gloves. The reward changes posture. People lean forward, sentence endings sharpen, and the city starts speaking like a courtroom. Near term, tips converge on packets and steamers bound for the continent, where German is currency and company. One name rises from ticket clerks and harbor gossip. Wangerland, said slowly, as if tasting the word for certainty. Officers assemble at the pier with notebooks, interpreters, and a quiet hope that the timetable does not lie. They intend to catch a neat man with careful hands before he becomes only a wake on gray water. Near-term consequence, the hunt leaves Bloomsbury for the docks, where uniforms meet manifest lists and gangways. Bridge. The next scene is a lineup on wet planks, an assistant surgeon in cuffs, and a surprise. The Wangerland rocks against its moorings while gulls sketch impatient loops over the harbor's iron geometry. Detectives step aboard with the captain's permission, boots thudding softly, eyes adjusting from fog to varnished passageways. They ask for a German assistant surgeon, and a young man named Vobe presents himself with wary professionalism. His hands show the small cuts and stains of work. His papers are in order. His accent is crisp. Dock workers, a waiter, and the fruiterer are brought forward, each separated, each asked to point if certainty appears. Crowds gather despite the rain. There is always time for theater when justice rehearses on public boards. The first witness hesitates, then lifts a finger toward the clergyman traveling second cabin, not the surgeon in question. A murmur rolls across the quay. Even the ship seems to tilt, surprised by the choice of direction. A second witness follows suit, choosing the pastor, Dr. Gottfried Hessel, whose luggage bears sermons and letters, not scalpels. How does recognition behave when expectation and respectability pull in opposite directions beneath so many watching eyes? More faces cycle through. More fingers select the minister, whose composure reads as virtue to some, calculation to others. It is worth noting that lineups then were informal, their choreography vulnerable to suggestion, fatigue, and rumor. The assistant surgeon protests in halting English. The pastor answers calmly in German. The audience supplies its own translation. Constables weigh the pattern and decide it is enough. Suspicion changes cabins, and the cuffs change wrists. Hessel keeps his gaze level, neither defiant nor pleading, as if accustomed to crowded rooms and moral scrutiny. Vobe stands there, relieved and offended, a man suddenly recast as bystander by a handful of pointed hands. Manifests are copied. A cabin is searched politely. Nothing resists explanation except the witness's certainty itself. Near term, Hessel will be taken to London, to Bow Street's bright, echoing chamber, where headlines wait. Donations will later find him. Sympathy will draft letters. The city loves to rescue men wearing collars. But for now, he is only a suspect on a wet pier, carrying the weight of misrecognition. Near-term consequence, the case pivots from a medical suspect to a minister, tightening the story for the courts. Bridge. The next stop is the magistrate's bench, where rewards, timelines, and alibis will collide under gaslight. Bow Street smells of wet wool and ink, where cases move quickly unless spectacle slows them. Clerks arrange files, ushers murmur, a magistrate studies the room with polite, wintered attention. The charge relies on witnesses, not instruments, memories set beside a reward that sparkles like frost. What happens when recognition stands on tiptoe, craning toward 200 pounds and a headline? The waiter repeats his accent story. The fruiterer names the purchase. The barmaid recalls nearness. Each voice is confident alone, less certain when time, light, and expectation are compared carefully. Defense rises, trims phrases to the bone, and points calmly toward the printed bounty. Lineups were informal, counsel notes. Suggestion travels fast when pockets hope for Christmas relief. A neutral observation fits here. Courts respect documents more than eloquent recall, especially under pressure. Ledger pages matter, clocks matter, receipts matter. Stories matter most when anchored to stubborn paper. The pastor answers evenly, details his lodgings, and names staff who can place him overnight. A night clerk appears with a register. Inked lines make their quiet, confident march across dates. The magistrate listens, asks for times twice, and glances at the door as if measuring distance. Prosecution emphasizes certainty. Defense emphasizes procedure. The room leans toward habit over heat. If the suspect ate, washed, arranged, and locked, why leave a trail so tidy and theatrical? Near term, the bench concludes the case is thin. Possible, perhaps, but insufficient to hold a man. Hessel is discharged, not vindicated in philosophy, merely released in law, which is colder. Reporters note the decision. Headlines pivot from Hunt to Homecoming. Sympathy gathers like dry kindling. The assistant surgeon, once cuffed, fades to footnote. The minister becomes a parable about misjudgment. A brief aside is fair. Public absolution travels faster for collars than for corsets. Friends escort him out, someone presses a hand, someone else promises to write to the papers. Near-term consequence. Police lose momentum, and the investigation must widen without its neat priestly center. Witnesses grow cautious. Contradictions feel heavier. Christmas goodwill shifts from justice to charity. The room where Harriet died remains the same. No verdict can rearrange that bed, but attention rarely lingers on rooms without a man to rescue, especially in January. Bridge. The city soon proves its affection in coin and letters, rewarding the respectable figure it briefly suspected. Subscription lists open on polished counters and pens scratch in sympathy's tidy, upward strokes. Pounds accumulate, a civic balm. The total climbs beyond what many earn in a year. Even the palace sends a small, careful sum, a gesture that folds reputation into currency. The Prime Minister drafts apologies. Editors applaud. The narrative hardens into rescue rather than uncertainty. Who receives swift comfort when a story breaks? A bereaved child's mother, or the minister misrecognized? Crowds prefer a man restored to honor over a woman whose honor was always negotiated. Public generosity is admirable, yet it often sails ahead of confirmed facts and docks triumphantly. Letters arrive from Germany as well, unsigned hands hinting at debts, a temper, or drink. Such notes complicate the portrait without overturning it. They land too late and too softly. Donors rarely ask refunds when a fairy tale ending has already purchased communal relief. Meanwhile, Harriet receives no fund, no royal shilling, no editorial that warms her memory. Her name remains transactional. Paid up, paid late, paid with interest no one intended to charge. A neutral observation belongs here. Charity can illuminate bias as clearly as cruelty ever does. Police still canvass but leads cool. The locked door grows abstract, the apple merely curious. Detectives return to day work. A few insist the German line remains promising, though unfashionable. Theaters move on to new bills. The Alhambra keeps time. Applause forgets efficiently by February. The boarding house repairs its splintered jam and fills the room with someone else's breathing. Near term, the case settles into that English category, unsolved but storied, appropriate for winter retellings. Sympathy continues for the minister. He preaches again. The city congratulates itself on fairness. Yet fairness without truth is a kind of performance, impressive staging with the curtains never drawn. What would it take to reopen the file, an itinerary, a passenger list, or another crime? Decades pass, and scholarship learns new habits, global rosters, comparative cases, and deeper patience. A researcher in our century follows a thread from Bloomsbury to a ship heading east. He notices a German traveler boarding 2 days later, under another name, bound for long water. Near-term consequence, the story stretches across oceans, pulling the locked room toward an open deck. Bridge. We sail now to the Rifleman, where poison is attempted, a captain is killed, and the scaffold waits. Cold cases do not die. They quiet down until new methods teach old evidence different languages. Harriet's file slept, transferred, trimmed, and retold, its edges rounded by retellings and winter nostalgia. Forensics matured elsewhere. Dentists compared bite marks, statisticians disciplined memory, and archivists warmed microfilm into pixels. Passenger lists surfaced online, stitched from brittle ledgers that had once gathered dust beside harbor windows. Police notebooks appeared in auctions, then libraries, court calendars synced with newspapers like long separated clocks agreeing again. What happens when a locked room is dragged into the daylight of searchable global archives? It grows corridors, suddenly connecting to ships, hotels, and foreign parishes that never seemed near before. Scholars learn to cross-check beer adverts with timetables and funerals with fairy times hiding inside obituaries. The apple's bite suggested waiting. Waiting suggested premeditation. Premeditation suggested a traveler with a schedule to keep. The locked door implied confidence. Confidence implied practice. Practice implied a man who did not expect interruption. Those inferences are modest, yet they steer attention toward men who leave on time and read maps well. A modern researcher followed that logic, then followed railways outward until the tracks ended at a pier. German-speaking passengers were few on certain sailings. Their names print sharply, their destinations shimmer like mirages across water. One itinerary rose from the ledger, ink steady, date exact, cabin noted with clerkly pride. Its bearer matched language, bearing, and timing. His route offered distance enough to cool London's attention. Digitization revealed more than names. It exposed how close two stories ran without ever touching officially. A small caution belongs here. Elegant parallels are not proof, and cold cases love a clever coincidence. Still, coincidences deserve testing when motives, skills, and schedules align within 48 hours of a bloodstained room. The research widened to colonial records, consular notes, and a cargo manifest that felt suddenly narrative. A profile emerged, educated, confident, likely familiar with ships, and ready to reinvent himself under another name. Near term consequence, the Bloomsbury file gained a fresh lead, a human thread leaving England on Boxing Day. Bridge. That thread belongs to Wilhelm Krauss, also known as William Cross, who stepped aboard the Rifleman and sailed toward a darker chapter. Wilhelm Krauss appears first as Ink, a neat German hand declaring passage on the bark Rifleman. 2 days after the Bloomsbury murder, he boards, traveling under an English alias that sits comfortably. He speaks well, carries himself like a man accustomed to orders, and prefers precision over conversation. The alias, William Cross, works fine at sea, where biographies dissolve into wind and routine duties. Why does a well-composed traveler flee so briskly, calendar crisp, luggage tidy, as if outrunning only weather? His background hints at medical familiarity. His demeanor suggests competence. His timing suggests a story unsaid. Crewmen remember a passenger who watched closely, asked practical questions, and learned shipboard patterns quickly. He moved through the Rifleman like someone scouting a stage, noting entrances, exits, and where curtains jam. A curious detail surfaces in later testimony. He stockpiled substances that were not ordinary cabin comforts. On long voyages, medicine chests are legitimate. It is quantities and combinations that begin to talk. He positioned himself as helpful, the sort of man who volunteers assistance when seas run rough and tempers rise. Such men become indispensable briefly, then invisible again. Their gratitude purchases access better than coins might. Our caution remains. None of this proves London. It merely aligns temperament, skill, and a razor-thin calendar. Yet alignment matters when lives intersect by chance. Shipping lanes blur borders and grant alibis generous horizons. The Rifleman cuts south and east, the weeks lengthening, the crew falling into the strict kindness of routine. Christmas turns to January. England recedes. The locked door feels like a distant stage prop dismantled. Krauss, under Cross, cultivates trust, the way ivy learns a wall by touch, patient and upward. He offers draft remedies, counts rations, and helps where a steady hand earns gratitude without debt. The ship is an ecosystem. Change one habit and other habits shift quietly to accommodate the newcomer. Near-term consequence. When trouble begins, in the sick bay, in mugs, in the captain's cabin, his helpfulness will read differently. The narrative tightens toward a fatal confrontation, where courage, poison, and blades crowd the same small space. Bridge. We enter that space next. The attempted mass poisoning and the murder of Captain Longmuir, staged far from London but impossible to ignore. 3 months later, the Rifleman rides a long swell. Canvas taut, crew lulled by routine's metronome. A passenger called William Cross moves easily among them, helpful with bandages, doses, and practical conversation. One evening, mugs pass hand to hand. Several men sicken together, stomachs clenching, eyes gone glassy. The captain orders buckets, fresh water, and watches the helpful passenger a shade more carefully. Why do ailments spread so neatly, like drill, when sea medicine usually misbehaves and staggers? The night tightens. A quarrel at the rail becomes a summons to the captain's cramped cabin. Inside, voices crowd the space. The smell is spirits and salt, with something colder underneath. The passenger explains, offers remedies, then falters when questions probe quantities, access, and private stores. He has been collecting powders, tinctures, and odds of rope, explanations ready, none fully restful. A neutral observation belongs here. Preparation is not guilt, but it is an enemy of coincidence. The captain signals restraint, the passenger refuses it, hand sees, a blade flashes, and lung sees air. Wood thuds, glass breaks, and discipline scrambles that brittle order every ship must rehearse. When bodies separate, the master of the vessel is bleeding. the crew shaking with sudden fury. They overwhelm Cross, bind him, and secure the cabin, inventorying a kit that looks like rehearsal. Knots are pre-tied, gags half-fashioned, and a sketch of the watch schedule sits too neatly. The implication is ugly and practical. Seize the ship, drug the hands, and steer a new course. Sick men recover by dawn. The passengers' poisons proved more ambition than science this first attempt. The dead do not recover. The captain's absence turns routine into a haunted choreography of duty. A mate assumes command, writes the log with a hard pen, and prepares statements with the surgeon. They set a strict watch over their prisoner and recalibrate the voyage with a courtroom at the end. The sea can feel indifferent. Today, it feels like a witness that will not look away. Near term, the rifleman aims for colonial authority, where affidavits will do what ropes began. Sailors practice their testimony aloud, sanding splinters from memory so the bench won't catch on them. The alias holds for now, the calendar does not. It leans back toward London with a quiet insistence. Bridge, land is ahead. Sydney, a dock of uniforms, a coroner's cool questions, and a name that will not save him. Sydney receives the rifleman with official efficiency, grieving the captain while gathering facts in orderly stacks. Witnesses are separated. Statements repeat with small human disagreements about angles, seconds, and the weight of fear. The prisoner names himself William Cross. Investigators discover Wilhelm Krauss traveling beneath that tidy English fold. His kit is set out on a trestle, powders, cordage, and papers that read like intentions. A magistrate hears the story's spine first. Attempted poisoning, violent resistance, and a captain cut down. Why would an innocent traveler stock solutions and strings as if rehearsing a mutiny in miniature? The court does not hurry, shipping calendars flex. Still, testimony accumulates like ballast in the hold. Neutral note, colonial trials cared for procedure. They distrusted melodrama, especially from men who changed names. Crewmen reconstruct the sickbay. A mate recalls the cabin fight. The surgeon narrates patterns and doses. Krauss answers calmly, fluent and remote, then snags on details that ordinary passengers rarely learn. The bench weighs character, opportunity, and preparation. When those align, motive needs fewer adjectives. A verdict arrives with the certainty governments prefer at sea, measured, documented, and signed in 3 places. Sentence follows, not theatrical, merely official, the marine answer to an inland crime of audacity. Appeals find no purchase. July approaches, the city goes on, the gallows waits as scheduled. On the first day of the month, a scaffold delivers what the logbook could only predict. Execution is public bookkeeping, cruel, final, and perversely calming to those who drew straight lines. Does that rope also answer Bloomsbury, or does it settle only the deck beneath Australian sun? History refuses to bless the coincidence. It offers a possibility shaped by timing, skill, and demeanor. Back in London, a plaster bite mark sleeps in storage, its crescent still insolent under dust. Elsewhere, cemetery records note a burial. Dental notes may lurk in provincial ledgers or family trunks. Modern work could test an old cast against a jaw, or at least reject the romance cleanly. A caution survives. Exhumations and comparisons demand law, ethics, and a purpose beyond curiosity. Near-term consequence. Scholars gain a suspect with means, method, and a 2-day window that refuses to fade. The child in London remains the truest loss. No verdict can repair that arithmetic. Police files teach a final lesson. Respectability deflects faster than evidence moves, especially at Christmas. Bridge. We step back from docs and documents to ask what this case changed, who it protected, and what it still demands from us now. Harriet's murder exposes a city where class smooths reputations as efficiently as law sharpens blame. Respectability speaks first, evidence catches up later, and sometimes never, especially when the victim worked for applause. 3 immediate consequences follow from this winter room and its tidy, theatrical lock. Investigations tilt toward men who look trustworthy, a bias that moves faster than corrections can travel. Early forensics generate clues without closure, inviting today's laboratories to finish unanswered sentences from 1872. Global archives now link ledgers, manifests, and parish books, making London's closed-door echo in distant harbors. It bears noting that sympathy often arrives where narrative is comfortable, not where justice is most needed. A fair reading of the case demands we hold 2 truths without blinking. Poverty complicates lives, and violence is chosen. So what remains to do, besides retell the riddle each December and mourn a life reduced to headlines? One path is cautious science. Recover dental records, re examine the cast, and compare with documented remains in Australia. Another is bureaucratic patience. Align hotel registers, ship lists, and consular notes until coincidences lose their charm. A third is cultural honesty. Question why public generosity embraced a minister while forgetting the woman he replaced. None of this guarantees a verdict. It promises only cleaner doubts, which are still better than myths. Yet what if a jaw, a ledger, or a graveside file finally answers that apple's crescent? Would London accept that justice arrived late and for a different crime, under foreign sun? The case asks us to be braver with uncertainty and kinder with memory. It also asks one last question we cannot ignore. If proof surfaced tomorrow, who would be ready to believe it and who would look away?